So this is our research poster overviewing and outlining our project that explored the impact of extracurricular job training in adolescents with autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. So first, let's go into a little bit of introduction and background knowledge into this topic. Through our research, we discovered that teenagers and young adults with ASD are underemployed compared to their peers, and they experience more challenges in the workplace. Despite the presence of vocational rehabilitation services, improvements have not been made in employment outcomes. In other words, opportunities for students to practice job skills in the community do exist, but it's more of an exception for high school students with ASD to be placed in such programs and find success as a result thereof in employment opportunities. So we wanted to create an opportunity for students to practice job skills in which their strengths are an asset in order to provide them evidence that they can succeed long-term in the workplace and boost their confidence. This leads us into our objectives and our hypothesis for this project. We wanted to create a setting for adolescents with ASD to practice job skills by creating an extracurricular club that sells concessions during sporting events, school sporting events, that we called the Concession Club. The objective being to explore the relationship between participation in a club focused on practicing job skills in a realistic setting and later success in employment. This would be defined by rate of employment as a group, length of time employed, and self-confidence in the workplace as reported post-graduation. Our central hypothesis was that the practical application of job skills adolescents in the extracurricular club obtain will result in improved employment outcomes. Participants will be employed more as a group and hold their jobs for longer than students with ASD who did not participate in the club. The rationale behind this study is rooted in the knowledge that the patchwork for pre-employment opportunities for students with ASD is insufficient to meet their needs, and opportunities across the country vary widely due to the differences in how each state conducts vocational services for the ASD population. Creation of an opportunity outside of the formal vocational framework as well might be more feasible for schools to implement due to its status as an optional extracurricular activity, with the long-term goal being to develop additional viable alternatives for job skill practice for high school students with ASD in order to better meet identified needs.
All right, next, let's discuss our methods and the results from our study. So we conducted the study with 40 high school students divided into two groups. Our experimental group participated in the concession club, and our control group did not participate. These were all students with a positive diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, and they all ranged within 14 to 18 years old. So the treatment included training job skills through 4 student events throughout the semester, as well as participation in back-end aspects of business management, such as ordering stock, managing finances, and scheduling. Follow-up surveys were conducted each year post-graduation at 1-year intervals to determine employment status, confidence in maintaining employment, and overall length of employment. A $20 incentive was provided if all 3 follow-up surveys were completed. Let's see the results. This study demonstrated that those who participated in the concession club showed improvement in all of the research question areas, and outcomes stayed consistent over the 3-year period. Those who did not participate in the concession club had poorer outcomes in the research question areas, and outcomes were less consistent over time. And the p-value was calculated comparing both the experimental group and the control group using a t-test, and all of the values of the concession club were compared to the values for the control group. The p-value was less than 0.05, which shows statistical significance and supports the difference between the group and was not simply due to chance. This rejects the null hypothesis.
Okay, so what are the conclusions of this study? Well, the main takeaway is that from the data that we have, participation in the job skills-based extracurricular club or concession club did show a significant increase in length of employment, employment status, whether you're employed or not, and satisfaction and confidence with employment post-graduation. So this club therefore does demonstrate its value as a tool for helping students with ASD develop job skills that help them find and keep worthwhile employment. So we've proven the feasibility of this kind of a tool. Next, we'll get into the limitations. So there are a few things to be mindful of when looking at this data. There are some limitations to this study. The first is that the study was only done at one school site. So we don't know if this type of extracurricular would have a similar impact at schools with a different demographic makeup. So different cities might have different makeups of industries, for example. And so perhaps a student who lives in a town where there are more industrial opportunities or agricultural job opportunities available post-high school graduation might get less benefit from a program focused on developing skills in a retail setting. So future studies could focus on studying the implementations of this type of extracurricular in several high schools and compare the data across those, taking into account those demographic and job opportunity differences in those areas. The next limitation is that we have limited data on what industry students went into post-graduation. We only collected data on whether or not they were employed and for how long. So future studies on this type of extracurricular activity could collect that data. The last limitation to note is that we lack qualitative data. So we don't know a lot about the adolescents' individual perspectives on their time in the club, what parts they found most and least valuable, what skills they feel directly transferred to their jobs, and so on. And so future study of this kind of a club might benefit from a mixed methods design. We could use the qualitative and the quantitative data. We could triangulate that in a mixed methods design, and then that would provide those more personal in-depth reflections about the experiences of students in concession club. So we'll get into the clinical application. So moving forward, what are some things to think about if we wanted to implement this type of a program? Well, it's feasible for schools to implement this kind of extracurricular because it's self-sustaining in cost. So the proceeds the children make from selling the concessions go back into the business to buy stock. And because it's an extracurricular, it's also not subject to the same administrative approval process. There's less hoops to jump through. You can get off the ground faster than if it were a curricular activity. This kind of an opportunity can also be modified to fit the unique needs of any school and any makeup of students in terms of severity. So for example, if a school site, has more students with autism spectrum disorder on that more moderate severe side, perhaps the club could be modified to where they're paired with a neurotypical peer during the sporting games where they sell concessions. It also provides a really valuable inclusion opportunity for students to be at a sports game, interacting with their neurotypical peers and community members and parents that are at these sporting games, and more inclusion is better. The one downside to this is that it does require a teacher and or therapist to volunteer their time to oversee everything. And then last, we'll briefly show our references. And so just to wrap up, we hope you found this information interesting and valuable for clinical practice, and we thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to scan the QR code in the middle of the poster, which will take you to our paper with more detailed information.